Life Stories brings you a tale of power, prejudice, and an unexpected twist. In a world where respect often seems like a luxury reserved for the few, one man's patience is tested in a way that forces him to confront not just a delay, but a system that undermines his worth. What happens when the balance of power shifts in an instant? Join us as we explore a moment that could change everything. Subscribe to the channel to begin today's story and discover the lessons that lie beneath the surface. I remember the moment so clearly, as if the events of that morning had been etched into my mind. It was the kind of day that should have been routine. A simple business meeting in a city I had come to know well. But nothing about that meeting would be routine. The bank's lobby felt cold, sterile, and indifferent, a place that seemed more designed to impress the wealthy and powerful than to make anyone feel truly welcome. I had walked in with the confidence that I had earned, my shoes clicking against the marble floors, my briefcase at my side. But even then, something was off. I had made an appointment weeks in advance. As someone who had built his success from the ground up, I had learned how to navigate these high-pressure environments. But what I encountered at Riverstone Bank was not a display of professionalism, it was indifference. The receptionist barely looked up from her computer screen when I approached, her fingers tapping away with a rhythm that seemed almost mechanical. She gave me a brief nod and a vague wave. But there was no warmth, no recognition of the importance of my visit. She simply told me to have a seat and wait. The minutes dragged on, and I noticed the clock on the wall ticking relentlessly, marking the passing of time in a way that seemed almost mocking. An hour had passed, and still no one had acknowledged my presence. I glanced around, watching as others, some dressed in suits, some in casual attire, were ushered past me, disappearing behind frosted glass doors. I had seen this before, but never had it felt so blatant, so personal. I had confirmed my appointment. Why was I still sitting here? Ignored? Frustration began to build inside me, a slow burn that I couldn't extinguish. I had been patient in the past, understanding that delays happen, but this wasn't about a simple delay. It wasn't just about waiting my turn, it was about something much deeper. Something unspoken. I felt the sting of a message that had been sent without words. A message that I wasn't welcome, that my time didn't matter. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was deliberate. And then, as if on cue, the atmosphere in the lobby shifted. A group of men entered, their presence commanding attention. They were dressed in tailored suits, their footsteps purposeful, exuding an air of quiet authority. At the center of the group stood the CEO of Riverstone Bank, a man I had seen in the papers but had never met. His name was Thomas Walker, and I had heard enough about him to know that his word carried weight in the business world. As he strode past me, his gaze flicked over me for a brief moment, but there was no recognition, no acknowledgement. I stood up straighter, the tension in the air now palpable. This wasn't just a meeting anymore. This had become something else. It had become a lesson in respect. A lesson that I wasn't going to let slide. I had no intention of letting this moment pass without making my presence known. I had waited long enough. I watched as the men in suits moved with ease, their steps measured, their faces familiar with the routine. They were clearly at home in this world, in this space that had so quickly made me feel like an outsider. As I sat back down, the realization settled in. I wasn't being treated like a client. I wasn't being treated as an equal. I was being overlooked, deliberately dismissed in a place that prided itself on exclusivity. It was then that I saw the familiar pattern, the subtle way in which some people were treated differently. A man in a gray suit, a woman in a cream blazer. They walked past me without hesitation, without question. I watched as they were greeted warmly, as if they were regulars, as if they belonged here. The receptionist barely glanced at me, but for them, there was a friendly smile, a quick greeting, and in moments, they were escorted into meetings without so much as a second thought. I had seen enough. I stood up again, but this time, I didn't walk to the desk. I walked straight toward the frosted glass doors, ignoring the startled call of the receptionist behind me. I could hear her voice, "Sir," but I didn't stop. I had been patient for long enough. This wasn't about being polite anymore. This was about standing up for myself, for my time, and for the principle that no one should be treated as invisible. The hallway inside the bank was quiet, lined with polished mahogany desks and the soft hum of conversation. I walked past closed doors, the murmur of business inside them almost making me feel like I had stepped into another world, a world I had never quite been invited into. But I wasn't going to turn back now. I had come too far to let this moment pass without making my presence known. And then I saw her, Sarah Thompson, the bank executive I had been scheduled to meet. She sat at her desk, typing away, her focus entirely elsewhere, when she looked up and saw me standing in her office doorway. Her surprise was almost palpable. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her tone clipped. "You should have waited to be called." I didn't sit because she invited me to. I sat because I chose to. Because I had earned that right. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let her control it. I sat in the chair across from Sarah Thompson, the cool, silent tension between us growing with each passing second. She had asked me to sit. But it wasn't a request I had intended to honor. I was here because I had chosen to be here. And I would speak on my terms, not hers. Her eyes flickered to the folder in front of her, the one she had been pretending to focus on, as if that document held all the answers. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on the room. Both of us aware of the fact that I wasn't just any client waiting for a meeting. I was someone whose time had been wasted, whose presence had been ignored. I wasn't sure if Sarah even realized how much power she had just given me by letting me walk into her office uninvited. Or if she thought I was just another person she could brush off. I met her gaze steadily, refusing to let her turn the conversation into an excuse for the delays I had suffered. The anger bubbling inside me didn't dissipate. Instead, it grew, quietly, methodically. "I've been waiting for over an hour," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "And I've watched at least half a dozen people who came in after me, without an appointment. Mind you, be escorted into meetings like it was nothing. I don't think this is a scheduling mix-up." Her expression remained neutral, though I could see the flicker of surprise in her eyes. She had clearly been expecting someone less assertive. She had probably thought she could smooth things over with a polite excuse. But this wasn't a mistake. And I wasn't going to let her pretend it was. I was more than just an inconvenience to be shuffled aside. Sarah's fingers hesitated over the folder, the silence between us thickening. She opened her mouth to speak, but her words were drowned out by the sound of footsteps coming from down the hallway. I saw the figures before I heard them, their voices low but carrying. The echo of their footsteps confident as they approached. I knew exactly who they were before they even stepped into the room. This wasn't just another group of executives passing through. This was the real power in the bank, the ones who made the decisions. The ones who could shift the balance with a single word. The door swung open, and 3 men walked in, their tailored suits commanding attention. At the front of the group was Thomas Walker, the CEO of Riverstone Bank, a man whose name had been synonymous with power in the industry. He was a man I had seen in the media countless times. Always poised, always in control, but as his eyes swept over the room and landed on me, I saw something unexpected, a flicker of recognition, then a grin spreading across his face. "Marcus?" His voice carried with a friendly familiarity, as though he had just bumped into an old friend. I had never met Thomas before, but the way he greeted me felt personal, as though we had shared some connection in the past. I stood up to shake his hand, my grip firm, my expression calm. "Yes, Mr. Walker, I've been waiting for quite a while." His gaze shifted briefly to Sarah, and in that instant, I saw the shift in the room. The air changed, becoming heavier, more charged with an unspoken understanding. Sarah's posture stiffened, her usual confidence crumbling in the face of Thomas's presence. She had been in control of the situation, but that control slipped away the moment the CEO entered. She might have thought she could ignore a man like me, but Thomas Walker was not someone you could dismiss so easily. Thomas's jaw tightened as he turned back to me, his expression now serious. "How long exactly?" I met his gaze without hesitation. "An hour and a half." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence you hear when people are lost in thought. No, this was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. The realization of what had been allowed to happen in his bank was sinking in. And I could see it in Thomas's eyes. There were no excuses. No polite brush-offs this time. He had been forced to confront the fact that someone had been treated with outright disrespect in his institution. And from the look on his face, I could tell that this was not something he took lightly. Without a word, Thomas turned to Sarah, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Step outside." There was no argument, no hesitation. Sarah stood up, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her face a mask of frustration. She left the room without saying a word, her departure leaving the air heavy with the unspoken consequences of her actions. Thomas turned back to me, his focus entirely on me now. "This isn't how we operate," he said, his voice low but firm, almost apologetic. It was a simple statement, but it held so much meaning. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, like the room itself was finally acknowledging the injustice that had taken place. As Sarah left the room, the atmosphere between Thomas and I shifted completely. There was no tension now, no power struggle. It was simply two people, one in a position of authority and the other standing up for what he deserved. Acknowledging the moment that had passed. Thomas didn't offer empty excuses or insincere apologies. He didn't need to. His recognition of the issue was enough. I could see the weight of the situation settle in on him as he turned back to me. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again," Thomas said, his tone both reassuring and resolute. "Your time is valuable, and I respect that." I nodded, feeling a sense of validation I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about me, about being acknowledged. It was about something deeper, about standing up for fairness, about making sure no one ever feels invisible. He understood that, and in that understanding, I found a sense of peace. The conversation shifted to the business at hand, and we discussed matters calmly. But the air was lighter now. I could feel the shift in power, not just in terms of the meeting, but in how I was treated from then on. I knew I had earned that respect not by demanding it, but by standing my ground in the face of injustice. As I left the bank, the sun felt brighter, and I could finally breathe easily again. I had been tested, and I had passed. Sometimes, the real battles aren't the ones fought in boardrooms or with numbers. They're the ones that challenge your sense of self-worth and the way others perceive you. If this story resonated with you, hit like, share it, and help Life Stories reach 10,000 subscribers. Because these stories, they need to be told.